Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The Liberal government's budget will be delivered in about an hour from now. The words big and bold have been repeated in recent weeks, as has the word sacrifice. As the government pursues growth and investment, it's also planning for cuts to jobs and services. Are those sacrifices justified? We'll talk about that up first. Plus, the impact of the budget on Canadians' cost of living. How do you plan your own finances amid uncertain economic times? CBC money columnist Bruce Sellery will join us at 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. And stay tuned to CBC for special live coverage on all of our platforms at 1 o'clock. And today is Budget Day in Canada. Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne is set to deliver the new Liberal government's first budget at 1 p.m. He's hinted it will contain what he calls generational investments to pivot from Canada's reliance on the U.S. as it navigates economic pressures spurred by the trade war. Now, CBC has confirmed the budget will include billions in infrastructure spending. But those investments do come with spending cuts. And in an address to the University of Ottawa last month, Prime Minister Mark Carney said transforming the Canadian economy will take some sacrifices.
I will always be straight about the challenges that we face and the choices that we must make. And to be clear, we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months. It will take some sacrifices, and it will take some time. Our government will work relentlessly to cut waste and drive efficiencies. And when we have to make difficult choices, we will be thoughtful, we will be transparent, we will be fair. We will work collaboratively with our colleagues across the aisle to build, protect, and empower Canadians. We won't play games. We won't waste time. And we won't hold back. We will do what it takes. We will play to win. We will bet on Canada and all Canadians.
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney in an earlier address. Now, today's budget is make or break for the Carney government. And the question now is whether the Liberals will get the support from the opposition. If it fails to pass, it could trigger a general election. The federal Conservatives say they would like to see a deficit of $42 billion or less, but some projections say the number could actually be as high as $100 billion. Also closely watching are industry and business leaders, especially those hard hit by U.S. tariffs. Matthew Holmes is the Executive Vice President and Chief of Public Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And he spoke to CBC News this morning and said that key to reviving the Canadian economy is making it attractive for business to invest in.
The government can't really do that itself. It can't really spend the economy into growth mode. It needs to attract private capital. It needs to make the conditions for growth the right conditions so that businesses want to invest in this country. They want to start new businesses. They want to grow those new businesses. But also foreign countries and companies see Canada as a place to put their capital to good work and to grow that capital. And so what we're hoping to see from this budget, and I have to say it's been a year and a half since we had a budget, and that's way too long. But what we're hoping to see are some really dedicated measures that will make Canada a competitive place for investment, for businesses to grow and make those decisions. And that's what we'll be watching for. And that's regulation, that's taxation, but it's also how are they incentivizing, how are they creating the conditions for that investment to happen.
That's Matthew Holmes, the Executive Vice President at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We're taking your calls on this then. You've heard about the need for investment and drawing investment from business, as we just heard there. We've also heard about what the Prime Minister has been talking about, big, bold cuts, big, bold in spending, as he has called it, investment, generational investment. What do you think of that? What is needed to grow the economy? And what could be sacrificed to spur that economic growth? Do you believe that that sacrifice we've been hearing about is justified? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Again, 604-669-3733. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca, and you can also leave a comment if you're joining us on TikTok. Joining me now is Alex Hemmingway, senior economist at the BC Society for Policy Solutions. Good afternoon, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
We've heard the words austerity budget, sacrifice. We just heard from the Prime Minister's primetime speech made a couple of weeks ago. What are those sacrifices that Canadians can expect?
Yeah, I think, this is certainly an important budget and an important moment for the country. It is concerning to me to hear that talk of sacrifices for Canadians who are already struggling with the cost of living. One of the strong signals we're hearing is about public service sector cuts. So that's, one thing I'll be watching closely when we see that budget document released later today. I think it's quite striking that we're hearing talk about sacrifice and public service cuts, but not much. There's very little indication that those at the very top, the wealthiest few, are going to be asked to make any sacrifices. And we know we've come through a period of time where wealth inequality has grown and grown in this country over the past few decades. So I think there's an interesting tension there in the way this budget is being framed in the lead up to it.
It's interesting. You mentioned the predicted, expected cuts to the public service, and we have been hearing about that certainly in the past few weeks. The public sector has grown significantly, right, under the Trudeau government. Let me just play a clip here from William Robson, who's president and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute.
While you can make an argument for better frontline services in a handful of places, a lot of Canadians would say the improvement in the frontline services hasn't really been all that spectacular. And when it comes to the overall cost, the federal government it's been on a bit of an anti-productivity kick. We've got a lot more people paying a lot more money, but really not seeing a whole lot more for it. So I think there is room for them to restrain that growth. I am not looking for big cuts. I do not think we're going to see actual spending declines in any major category of spending. With the trajectory of growth that the federal government's spending has been on over the last little while, even slowing the rate of increase down would feel to a lot of people like cuts because it's just been growing so explosively.
So it's William Robson, who's CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. And the size of the civil service as of 2024, under the Trudeau Liberals, 9 years at that time in power, grew more than 43%, according to the Treasury Board. So is there not room there when it comes to reducing the spending on the part of the federal government?
Well, I think there's a couple things to say. One important piece of context here is, we've been through a period over decades of, we saw severe cuts to the federal public service in the 1990s under a Liberal government at that time. We saw another round of cuts during the Stephen Harper conservative government in the 2000s. And there has been growth in more recent years. But when you look at, for example, federal public spending as a share of our total economic pie, as a share of GDP, it's still lower than it was prior to those deep cuts of the 1990s. And, one thing that I think we all want to keep in mind is that some parts of the cost of living crisis that we're facing today, the affordability crisis, result from underinvestment in key public goods, underinvestment in areas like housing, the failure to build a public childcare system. We've seen that reinvestment happening in the past few years. That should have been happening over the past few decades. So there can be really significant downsides to these types of cuts. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't ensure that money is being spent well. We should keep an eye on things like giveaways to large corporations, large subsidies to corporations that show up in our budget sometimes. And, it is, again, interesting to hear the talk of sacrifice and cuts at a time when we're talking about massively increasing outlays to the military. That's obviously a separate discussion in terms of the foreign policy side of that. But from an economic perspective, it's a huge outlay, and it's a non-productive outlay. Those are not assets that are, contributing to the long-term productivity of our economy, like in contrast with things like investment in infrastructure and public services that support Canadian workers.
And as you mentioned, that's another aspect of this, right? We've already heard about $9 billion on defense to be spent by the end of March, and so you're saying those are you're questioning that the focus on that kind of spending. So amid the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing, you don't see that as a need at the moment.
Well, I think there's a broader discussion there, and certainly I think you could make a case, given the threats that we've received repeatedly from the United States, if some of that reinvestment into the military was going towards, deterring the United States from, threats of annexation and so on, that would be one thing. It seems to be we're going in the other direction in the sense of, there's been talk of joining Trump's Golden Dome scheme, similar to the old Reagan Star Wars missile defense scheme. So that sounds to me more like deeper integration with the United States. So really what I'm trying to point out here is that there's a lot of contradictions in the framing that we're seeing. We're saying we have to tighten our buckles and cut public services, but at the same time, there's extraordinary money being put on the table in areas like the military, and there's very little discussion of raising additional revenue from those who are doing extremely well. As we see, with the wealth concentration at the very top of our society.
My guest, Alex Hemmingway, senior economist at the BC Society for Policy Solutions. We are looking ahead to the federal budget that's going to be delivered by Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne coming up at 1 o'clock. And we'll, of course, have live coverage on all our platforms, and stay tuned for that. But asking you now, what is needed to spur economic growth, to make Canada more resilient when it comes to our economy? And when we've heard about this term, sacrifice, is that justified in your view? What could be sacrificed to spur that economic growth? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Or just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email to bctoday@cbc.ca, and watching your comments on TikTok. Aaron is calling us from Burnaby. Yeah, your thoughts on what might be in the budget, what you see as needed to boost the economy, Aaron?
As usual, my politics come from the aspect of what I call sustainable economy, or a path towards a low emissions economy that we can keep doing. While I understand that we are trying to basically make the best or move our way to adjust our economy with issues to the south and to increase trade to other countries, I understand the aspect of fast tracking, that is occurring under Bill C-5. What I don't see, and what I don't think that we will continue to see, is a movement, basically through our government, to ultimately to a low emissions, basically economy that we can keep doing for a very long time. And this continues to be troubling, knowing the price that we are continuing, or the greater price that we're continuing to pay.
Yeah, interesting point there. And CBC reported this morning, for example, when it comes to climate change and carbon emissions, the Liberal government dropping that goal, the promise under Trudeau to plant 2 billion trees by 2031. So that was reported this morning as well. And there's been this shift, right, Alex, when it comes to a focus on hitting climate targets, to this kind of climate economic resilience. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's reason to be concerned there, as the caller is expressing. One of the encouraging signs that we're seeing signaled ahead of the budget, in my view, is the infrastructure funding that you mentioned, $50 billion for infrastructure. Of course, we need to see the details. It does look like some of that's going to be repurposed from some existing infrastructure funds. But so that's very important. What stands out to me is, if we back off from our climate commitments and addressing the issue of global warming, all the economic research over many years have told us that's going to cost us more in the long run, and it's going to put stress and damage on our infrastructure. So we're investing in infrastructure with one hand, but actually, if we double down on the fossil fuel economy, if we back off on addressing climate change, we're going to be creating pressures that will be damaging that infrastructure over decades to come and ultimately cost us more.
You mentioned earlier, Alex, the wealth disparity that's growing in Canada. On TikTok, notwithstanding Rob, thanks for joining us again today, posted add land value tax, remove income tax. And so talking there about ways to generate revenue and address that wealth inequality. Some would say that, I heard the C.D. Howe Institute being interviewed this morning saying what we actually need is corporate tax cuts in order to spur business investment. What are your thoughts on the I guess what kinds of tax cuts we might see or how that's structured right now?
Yeah, a land value tax could be a very useful revenue tool, particularly actually at the provincial level here in BC. We know we've seen massive increases in land wealth in this province, well over $1 trillion just in the past 20 years. And so using a tool like a land value tax to recapture some of that value, particularly from those at the very top, it is not only a good way to raise revenue that can be put towards badly needed public services that can help bring down the cost of living, whether that's investing in affordable housing, investing in childcare, or other public services, but it's also a land value tax is generally recognized by economists to be an extremely efficient tax because land is a fixed asset. No one who owns it is creating it or destroying it. It's not, it has no, that type of tax has little or no effect on incentives for investment. One other, at a federal level, we've published some research on the possibility of a comprehensive annual wealth tax of the type that exists in some other countries around the world today is being debated actively in countries like France. And what we found is that actually a wealth tax that targeted extremely narrowly only the top 0.5% of the richest Canadians with net wealth over $10 million could bring in $40 billion in its first year and rising each year. So that, I think, is maybe a useful piece of context when we think about the dilemmas we're facing. We do actually have opportunities to raise additional revenue that would allow us to make the types of investments that are really important to Canadians today.
Ellie writes us, on a similar note, tax the wealthiest Canadians fairly. It's the only real answer. Sadly, all politicians are beholden to the rich. Working class Canadians have sacrificed enough. It's no wonder millennial and Gen Z Canadians are cynical and nearly hopeless. Ellie, thank you for your comment on that. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. Taking your calls as well. We're asking you ahead of the budget set to be delivered in about just over half an hour from now, about 35 minutes. We're asking you what you think is needed to spur economic growth. What could be sacrificed? If we're talking about sacrifice, what could be sacrificed to boost the economy? And do you see that sacrifice as justified at all? You can call us 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Armin is up next, joining us from Surrey. Thanks for pulling over, Armin. I know you've been driving around, so thanks for pulling over and giving us a call.
No problem.
What are your thoughts? What are you hoping for in this budget?
The word sacrifice, I think, my perspective has always been that the idea that the government is taking on debt in order to prop up its spending, I've always viewed that as kind of ridiculous. In my view, I view this more as a kind of a correction than a sacrifice. I hope that either through reducing spending or raising taxes, the government has a balanced budget. In terms of what can be cut, if you actually look at what the federal government spends on, the number one thing it spends on is pensions. And, as someone who's quite young, it seems to me that a lot of the elderly people that I happen to know are actually quite comfortable and own homes and whatnot. And it seems to me that perhaps the old age security for wealthier individuals should be reduced. The other things the government spends on, I mean, Canada's military spending is pretty pathetic already. There's transfers to provinces, and then there's, I guess, Indigenous services, which, I can't comment on whether the money is being well spent there. On the topic of the public service, I have to say, I don't really see the value. I haven't received any value personally from the increased spending on the public service. For example, I tried to renew my passport about 2 years ago, and it took about 9 months for that to happen. So, obviously, I'm just one data point, but I have to say, I don't really see the added benefit, and I suspect that there's probably a lot of inefficiency in, a 40% increase in the size of the federal workforce. I have to ask, what are those people doing? Like, I don't access government services that require, that many people.
Excuse me. Armin, interesting that you called us, and I just read that email about, millennials and Gen Z, feeling disheartened and cynical, I think was the word. And so that email was pointing more towards taxes, but you're saying reduce the amount of spending. Can you tell me more about, what impact, what you're feeling when it comes to cost of living and what impact the overall economic uncertainty is having on someone like yourself?
Well, I'm actually about to graduate university and head into the job market. And right now, the job market is extremely tight. There's not a lot of job openings available. But to be fully honest, I don't really expect, it's not like the government can really fix that by waving its arms around. I guess when it comes to being cynical, the one thing I am cynical about is that there is the number one item on the government spending is on pensions. Okay. And all right. The one thing is that elderly people overwhelmingly tend to own their own homes, right? So I kind of question whether that is the right place to spend that money.
Okay. Your earlier point there as well. Okay, Armin, thank you very much for the call. As someone who's graduating post-secondary imminently and looking to enter the job market, let me ask you, Alex Hemmingway, my guest, is an economist at BC Policy Actions. What do you think is needed? We're talking long-term here. And of course, this generation looking at a very tight job market, perhaps looking at a deficit that we're expecting today to be, I think, somewhere between 70 to 100 billion. So what might give someone of Armin's generation more optimism?
Well, I think one of the single most important things we can do is address the housing crisis and shortage that we face. I expect to hear something about this in today's budget. That's incredibly important. We've been underbuilding across the country for decades now, both in terms of private market housing, but also in terms of dedicated, affordable, non-market housing from the public sector and public sector funded nonprofit housing. So, when I look at the budget this afternoon, those are two big things I'll be looking for, because we have heard a lot of discussion of this issue, a lot of government announcements addressing housing policy, right, but it hasn't matched the scale of the crisis that we face. So will we see a significant increase in public investment in non-market housing in this budget? I think that's a big question. We see the new Build Canada Homes program was announced recently, but we're talking about sort of 4,000 units in the first tranche of announcements, which is unfortunately a drop in the bucket. Similarly, I think we can connect this back up to the issue of infrastructure. If the government is coming forward with big infrastructure funding, it's very important that they use that and leverage that to get the types of reforms we need at the local level, particularly in big cities like Vancouver and Toronto that actually continue to block apartments on the vast majority of their residential land. That's pushing up the prices of homes, it's pushing up rents, and it's putting huge pressure on young households and on renter households of all ages. So if we can address those issues, that's fundamental to addressing that affordability challenge that so many households are facing right now.
Alex, always good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alex Hemmingway is senior economist at the BC Society for Policy Solutions. He joined us in Vancouver. I'm going to quickly go to one call here from Maggie in Cranbrook before we take you to the CBC News update with Taranjeet Parmar, who's waiting in the wings. But Maggie is waiting in Cranbrook as well. Hi there. What are your thoughts on what you're hoping for in this budget?
Hi. Thanks. Just a couple quick comments. What we should diminish, I think the border spending, I think that was just something that Trump threw out there, and we jumped at it. Nobody's going to the U.S. I think that should be much lowered. And with all the advertising that Mr. Eby wanted to do and Mr. Ford already did, use that advertising to bring the Americans here. We've got beautiful lakes. We've got golf courses and vineyards in the summer. We've got fabulous skiing going to be starting. Culture, their dollar is worth so much more here. Spend that money on advertising and get them to bring their money here, and that will be an income for Canada.
Boost the tourism, okay. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and a feather in their cap, because most people are so impressed by how they're treated here. They'll spread it, and Canada will be loved again by the States. We're loved by everybody else. I think that's just the way to go. A couple quick little changes and just attitudes, and that's it. And I think it'll work.
Maggie, thank you very much from Cranbrook. Yes, skiing is almost upon us. Thank you very much for that. Someone you know on TikTok posted, climate change is important, but prosperity and decreasing wealth inequality will do more to help. Wealth tax is easy to talk about, but impossible to implement. Thank you very much for your comment on TikTok as well. We're going to talk more about the budget and ask you more about your personal finances. How are you managing your own household budget amid economic uncertainty? So more on that, the cost of living aspect of all of this. We'll take your calls coming up after the CBC News update with Taranjeet Parmar.
Good afternoon. BC's softwood lumber industry is hoping today's federal budget will include more financial support. The Independent Wood Processors Association says liquidity is needed as soon as possible to help businesses that are slowing down and seeing staff layoffs due to rising U.S. tariffs. Yesterday, Premier David Eby announced BC will not run anti-tariff advertisements in the U.S. following a meeting with federal ministers. Home sales in the Vancouver area fell 14% in October compared to a year ago. That's according to Greater Vancouver Realtors, which says the benchmark price was also down 3.4%. New listings were down slightly from last year as well. The composite benchmark price for all residential properties was $1,132,000, down slightly from September. And a woman is in critical condition after being hit by a vehicle in Surrey. It happened just after 6 p.m. last night near King George Boulevard and 40th Avenue. Police say the driver of the vehicle remained at the scene and the cause of that collision is still under investigation. Those are your headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. For more information, you can go to the website anytime, cbc.ca/BC.
Taranjeet, thank you very much. That is Taranjeet Parmar in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Do stay tuned because in half an hour at 1 o'clock at the top of the clock, we'll bring you live special coverage of the federal budget as it is delivered by the finance minister in Ottawa. And today is budget day, and the Liberals are pledging a big, bold budget that will lay out generational investments. The federal government is promising billions in spending and in cuts. All this as lingering questions remain about cuts to public spending and how the deficit could grow. As far as how Canadians will receive the budget, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne had this to say.
Overall, if you ask me, Canadians will feel good tonight. We're going to be okay as a country. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of concerns in families, on the shop floor, in the fields. But I would say tonight people will go to bed and say, we're going to be okay. Canada is a strong country. We have strong foundation, strong industry. This budget will really bring us forward as a nation, empower people. It's a pivotal moment, and I think Canadians are ready for that.
Okay, well, now we're going to talk about Canadians and how many are continuing to struggle with the cost of living. So, what will the impact of this budget be on affordability? How are you managing your own personal finances amid the economic uncertainty? Is household debt a growing concern for you? Give us a call, 1-800 825 5950 604 669 3733. Again, 604 669 3733. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And like a few people have, leave a comment on our TikTok Live if you're joining us there. Bruce Sellery is my guest. He's CEO of Credit Canada, a CBC money columnist, and host of the podcast Moolah La, Money Made Simple. Hi, Bruce. It's nice to speak with you again.
Hello there. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, what are we seeing right now in terms of how Canadian households are doing?
It is an extraordinarily difficult time. So I'll give you the data point for us at Credit Canada. Our request for support is up 40% year to date versus the same period a year ago. It's an even higher figure for the province of British Columbia. Now, this is just one data point. It's just we're one nonprofit credit counseling agency. It's not the whole picture. But any other data point that you look at is equally concerning. So whether that's a report from a bank, from StatsCan, from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, from the credit bureaus, TransUnion and Equifax, there are no indicators that would say anything other than it is an exceedingly difficult time for Canadians. And why? We talked about the reasons 14,852 times. We are still dealing with the rising cost of living through the pandemic. Inflation was nuts. Housing is unaffordable. And the factor that we're seeing much more relevant to the people who call us for help is uncertainty in the job market. So some people have actually lost their job, and we know that's a thing. But we're also hearing from a lot of people who are getting a fewer number of shifts or less income, fewer tips, all those sorts of things. So I think the new topic is concerns about the labor market.
Wow. You know, it's interesting because you talk about fewer shifts. We know that some forestry companies here in BC, in light of the tariffs, have cut back on their workforce hours. That is affecting hundreds of workers there. This was a recent announcement. And as well, trying to get into the job market. We just heard from a university student who's graduating in our last half hour, getting into the job market. And we have talked about that, right? How it is getting harder for younger people to do so. And so in light of that, what are people cutting back on, or how are they dealing with that?
Well, I would say some people are cutting back and other people are having a harder time cutting back and are therefore either saving less or racking up even more debt. And I think what we need to hold in our hands is this paradox. So the paradox is the circumstances that we find ourselves in are brutal. And this other truth that exists at the very same time is there is much which is within our circle of control. So that's really, I am not a policy wonk. I'm not a politician. I'm not a bureaucrat. What I focus on is, or at least try to focus on, is helping individuals take control of their financial destiny. We are all in the same storm, but we are all in a different boat. And so whatever boat you're in, how are you going to paddle yourself, row yourself, sail yourself to calmer waters? And that's the big question. It's a very personal thing. Anything that I would say by way of advice would have to be customized to people's very specific circumstances.
Thousands of times, apparently, this year. Let me just put out the numbers once again. Bruce Sellery is my guest. He's CEO of a nonprofit credit counseling group, Credit Canada, as well as host of the podcast Moolah La, Money Made Simple. And you've heard him on our afternoon shows here in BC as a money columnist too. Let us know how you're managing your own finances amid economic uncertainty. Have you been affected by either a job cut or fewer shifts? Are you worried about your future when it comes to the labor market? And let us know as well. We talked about debt just now. So is your own household debt a growing concern? Our numbers, once again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. and you can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And before I go, actually, we have a call coming from Brandon, but this is someone who's based in Peachland. But I'm just going to read an email right now because Armand, who called us in our last half hour, who was a young person just about to graduate post-secondary, and he talked about, well, pensions are something that could be cut on because, as he posited that older Canadians were more well off or were more likely to have property. Lisa wrote us in response to that. I'd sure like to see the stats, as most seniors I know don't own their own home, and the only pensions that should be decreased are folks who have more than $1 million income. I never could figure out why someone who makes more than $1 million a year needs to get the same OAS as someone who makes $35,000. It's the same when there's a government refund for something, they give it to everyone. Adjusting to prices. Okay, thank you. She's sharing as well her own finances. I garden, I don't eat out, I quit going to concerts and live theater. I rent, which increases every year, but OAS does not increase. The government, the province provides its SAFER program for seniors. That does not rise yearly, and the dental program is somewhat disappointing as it doesn't cover 100%. I spent hundreds of dollars this year going to dentists. Okay, thank you for weighing in on that, Lisa, in response to our previous caller. Great to hear from you as well. bctoday@cbc.ca. As Bruce said, right, same, different boat, I think is what you said. Same river, same waters, but different boat. Let's take a call now from Keith, who is calling us from Brandon, Manitoba, but is actually the deputy mayor of Peachland. Hello, Keith.
Hello, how are you today?
I am well. Good to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in while you're traveling. So tell us about your own situation and what kinds of adaptations or adjustments you're making.
Well, one of the things that I see, I'm a musician on tour doing benefit concerts from Peachland to Ottawa for either the unhoused or the undernourished. It breaks my heart to see food bank usage go way up. Mm-hmm. It further breaks my heart to see veterans having to live in subsidized housing. On a personal basis, with my OAC, I'm 71 years of age. With my OAC and my CPP and a few other investments, I might make $65,000 a year, and it's pretty tight. It's pretty tight. Yeah. So one suggestion I heard, which was from one of your callers, was to perhaps increase the OAC to seniors based on income. I know there is another program, but you have to make so little to qualify. $65,000 a year is really not a pile of money to live on. So my suggestions would be to cut back on, I like the idea of cutting back on some of the expenses of the government, but I would rather see a little less spent on the border and a little more spent on putting food in the bellies of Canadians that just do not have nutritious food available to them. And it breaks my heart to see the rich people saying, why are we not all eating organic and healthy? And the bottom line is, if you're a single mother with 2 or 3 children, you put food in the belly as cheap as you possibly can, because that's what mothers do. So I'm very passionate about that.
Yeah, so much so that you are touring Canada and performing at these benefits. Keith, well, good on you for doing that, performing for food bank recipients and people who are unhoused. Thanks so much for calling us.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Good to hear from you. So, right. Bruce, I know it's going to be personal for everybody, but what are some ways we can try and tackle whether we're dealing with debt or just trying to put away some savings? What are some general bits of advice you can share?
Here's where we need to start. We need to start with the truth. And most people don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the finances because it's not a fun conversation.
No.
And I try my best. To make it as fun as possible. But it's not fun, right? So no. I think at Credit Canada, we talk a lot about sustainable spending. It is 3 steps: analyze, brainstorm, change. The first part, the analysis, it's not a complicated thing. It's how much is coming in, what's going out, and where. And you get a little snapshot of that, such that then you can brainstorm some creative ideas of how you can either increase income or cut spending. And to be sure, there are many families in this country in which there is literally nothing to cut. There's absolutely nothing to cut. But for a large segment of our population, there are some things that could be cut. They're really hard things to distinguish between a need and a want. And then the third thing is commit to some changes, not 50 changes, but 2 or 3 things that are going to make the biggest difference. And there's a level of creativity here, which I really encourage people to embark on. And there are ways in which we can open up our homes and think about things differently, such that we have a little bit of pressure taken off the brutal financial circumstances that so many people find themselves in.
Yeah, let's take a call now. Okay, so analyze, brainstorm, and change. Those 3 steps just to even get started. Okay, our numbers again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. And John is calling us in Mackenzie. Hi, John.
Hi again. How you doing?
I am well. You called yesterday?
Yeah, I think I did.
Regarding forestry. Yes, welcome back.
Yeah, and old Pat Bell, the forestry minister.
That's right.
He cracked a nut over there in China and started supplying wood there. Amazingly enough, I can go by rail to India now, and I hear our forestry minister is back to Asia to sell more wood, hopefully.
Now, what about personal finances, John?
Well, it's I was thinking about young Armand that was calling before the news.
Yeah.
And talking about graduating from school and looking for work. And I was thinking about the previous Liberal government pledging to plant 9 billion trees before, 2031? And, we're getting close. There's a lot of work up in the north here. I've met young people from all across Canada that have come here to British Columbia in the summers and done tree planting, and there's a lot to be done there. So hopefully in the budget, there's going to be a large amount of money put towards collecting the seeds and planting the trees that when they're my age, if they're planted next year, will be ready to go to market.
Okay.
And so hopefully we're going to see good investment in that.
Okay, John, and I do want to just want to jump in because there was a CBC reported this morning that in terms of the tree planting promise that has been axed in light of the kind of new priorities, you might say, of this government. Thank you so much for calling in from Mackenzie once again.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
As we're coming into Remembrance Day.
Okay, John, my apologies. I do have to jump in as the Prime Minister and Finance Minister are speaking right now.
Floor in the fields, in their homes. This is really a generational moment. So thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for your vision, because that budget really, will give a roadmap to this country to attract more investment, to be more prosperous, more confident. So, merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. C'est un plaisir
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present this budget. This is an historic moment for us and for the country. We're talking about generational investments, as the Prime Minister said, in our infrastructure and in productivity and competitiveness for the country, and of course, affordable housing. So I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to present the plan to Canadians, and I think everyone will see their interest in this budget. Only some 25 minutes left before your speech, and we get the numbers.
It's a crucial time for the country, and I think it's not just that, as you just said, all Canadians will see themselves in the budget because it will help them all, but in many respects, and at its core, the budget reflects Canadians. Because the thing that struck me, I think struck you, as we went across the country from early in the year, Canadians wanted to come together, want to take control of our futures. That's what this does. This gives us control of our future. We're going to build together. We're going to build Canada strong, and we're starting right now.
Totally.
Merci beaucoup.
So we're ready. Merci tout le monde. Merci, M. Gravilis. Sure.
That is the Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Federal Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne speaking just ahead of the budget being tabled by the Finance Minister in a few minutes. And again, stay tuned to CBC as we bring you live coverage of that. And right now we are talking about the federal budget, but also your household budget and how you're dealing with the cost of living. It has certainly been an ongoing concern, affordability, over the last few years. And so what are you doing in terms of dealing with the labor uncertainty, with perhaps impacts of the tariffs and all of that? So what that kind of economic uncertainty, what impact is it having on your own household budget? Is your debt an ongoing or growing concern for you? Our numbers again, 604-669-3733. Lori is calling us from Penticton. Hi, Lori.
Hello, how are you?
I am fine. And tell us about your own issues.
I'm actually very concerned about climate issues and about affordability because they go together. Mm-hmm. And so my concern is that when we are not funding social programs adequately, when we are not doing pharmacare and universal basic income, which would actually save us money across the whole country, and we're funding oil and gas and military, we're causing climate harms in other countries as well as in our own. And we're creating health issues. All of these things come down to health. And if we can tax the rich, which we can do, people have said that they don't know how to do that. It's not a hard thing. We used to tax the rich much higher in times past, and we have been lobbied into taxing them less and taxing the middle class more. Terribly unfair and leaving us really in the lurch. So
Lori,
taxing the rich would fund us.
Thank you very much for the call, Lori. In Penticton, Gordon is next in Vancouver now. How do you plan for economic uncertainty in your own household, Gordon?
Oh, I'm fortunate enough to be in the finance industry, so I planned quite well ahead of the maneuvers that the Canadian and the U.S. government were engaged in.
Okay. And did you want to say a little bit more about personal finances and how that might look for individuals in Canada?
Yes. Well, this budget is, if it is the amount that is speculated, which is tough to comment on right now because we don't know what it entails. It's going to take some time to get it and digest it. This is going to significantly harm the people who are on the margin right now, and it's also going to destroy this country. Okay. How I proofed myself and my family and people around me is we shifted all investments into the United States. We shifted all money and investments into the United States, and we've been doing very well because the United States, everybody has made them out as this bad boogeyman that is out to kill Canada. Trump has a 3-year term left. He's done in 3 years. The United States has been the greatest ally to Canada and to North America in its entire lifetime.
Okay, and would you say that still applies now?
No, because Canada has a problem that it's not addressing, and it's been expressed emphatically from the United States to Canada that they no longer trust us in the security apparatus that is the Five Eyes.
Okay.
The Biden administration.
Gordon, I'm just going to jump in. My apologies for jumping in. It sounds like we're getting into politics here, but I take your point in terms of that criticism of Canada and its military spending. That is something that the Prime Minister has talked about as well, and we are expecting to see that spending in the budget on the military. Thank you for raising that point. Doug is our last caller now in Surrey. Hi, Doug.
Hi, how you doing, young lady? I have a bit of a cold, so I'll be quick.
Not that young, but thank you.
Okay, I have figured out a little way that I'm going to put money into my TFSA and be able to pay my taxes the rest of my life so I don't have to think about it. CRA sends me out a pension deposit once a month, and what I do in the latter days of December, I give myself a late Christmas gift. I prepay some taxes to the tune of about $500, which buys me a GIC in what do you call it, my TFSA, but I don't put it into a GIC. This year, what I'm going to do is I'll pay my $500, and in March or February, somewhere in there, I'll get a refund back because my income is so low. My taxable income is about $10,000 less than where you don't pay taxes at all. It comes back to me. I put it into a savings part of a TFSA, and next year I'll do the same thing all over again. I have a condition that I inherited from my mother. I won't tell you what it is, but I have to buy pills periodically throughout the year. They're only on the books for 2 years, and then I lose them. And the upshot of it is this country needs a plan like they have for the dental plan. They need something for people like me that have to buy pills the rest of our life. And if we don't claim it in 2 years because we don't owe taxes, we can kiss it goodbye. This country needs to get its head out of its butt and start thinking about little people like me that's crawling up on 80. And I'm looking at that with the Canadian government the rest of my life.
Doug, I'm sorry to hear that, and it sounds like, yes, that's a drain on your own finances when it comes to the medication that you need, and you've also, in other ways, come up with a way to boost your own personal spending. I have 2 minutes left here with my guest, Bruce Sellery. You gave us 3 steps that we can take earlier on. What about, I guess, what solutions do we need right now when it comes to our own debt, for example? Like, are people
So this is going to
consolidating?
sound self-serving, but there is very low awareness of the nonprofit credit counselors in this country. We did some research. Maybe 2% of Canadians know we exist. There are a number of these organizations across the country. You pick up the phone, you talk to a counselor, and when we talk about people's like monthly cash flow, one of the big expenses is interest costs. If you qualify, if the financials make sense, you can do a debt consolidation program with Credit Canada in which we call your creditors and say, here's the reality of your client. Could you reduce that interest rate to 0? And then you would pay that debt over the course of typically about 4 years. There are consequences to that. Your credit score is affected, but at least you've got a plan and you can find your way out of this issue, which for many people is just this enormous weight on their shoulders. So when I talk about brainstorm, one of the things you could do is pick up the phone, call a nonprofit credit counselor, and see if a way to alleviate the burden of that interest might be some sort of an arrangement. It could be a DCP. It could be something called a consumer proposal. There are lots of options, but you have to inform yourself as to what those options are.
Wow. And again, it means you're going to have to talk about it.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. Our counselors are even friendlier than me, and I'm pretty friendly.